The world's attention is often drawn to crises that erupt suddenly, capturing headlines with their immediacy. Yet, some conflicts simmer for years, their horrors gradually escalating, largely unnoticed by the global community. Such is the tragedy of Sudan. Once full of promise, this African nation is now locked in a brutal civil war, its people trapped in a cycle of violence and displacement. What began as a power struggle between rival factions within the Sudanese government has spiraled into a humanitarian catastrophe. The Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces are vying for control, their conflict marked by horrific brutality and a blatant disregard for civilian life. The world can no longer afford to ignore the plight of the Sudanese people. Their story is a stark reminder of the human cost of indifference, a call to action for those who believe in peace, justice, and the dignity of all people. The conflict in Sudan is complex, its roots tangled in historical grievances, political maneuvering, and the struggle for resources. However, the current crisis can be traced back to a 2021 coup that fractured the fragile power-sharing agreement between civilian and military leaders. Since then, the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces have been engaged in a deadly dance, their rivalry erupting into open warfare in April 2023. Recent weeks have seen a surge in fighting, particularly in the densely populated areas of Khartoum North and Gezira State. The Sudanese armed forces, boasting superior firepower, have made some territorial gains, claiming control of key areas like Kafuri in Khartoum North and Abu Kuta in Gezira State. Yet victory remains elusive, and the rapid support forces, known for its guerrilla tactics, continue to pose a significant threat. The situation on the ground remains fluid, with reports of ongoing clashes, shifting alliances, and a constant threat of escalation. Amidst this chaos, it is the civilians who bear the brunt of the suffering. War, in its cruel indifference, does not discriminate between soldier and civilian, guilty and innocent. In Sudan, it is the ordinary people who are paying the heaviest price for a conflict they did not choose. The fighting has resulted in thousands of deaths, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire or targeted in brutal attacks. The United Nations estimates that over 20,000 people have been killed since the conflict began, and the true number is likely far higher. Hospitals and healthcare facilities, already strained by years of underfunding, are struggling to cope with the influx of wounded. Medical supplies are running low, and access to healthcare in conflict zones is extremely limited. Beyond the immediate casualties, the war has unleashed a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions. Millions have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in overcrowded camps or fleeing to neighboring countries already struggling to cope with their own challenges. Food and water are scarce, sanitation is poor, and the risk of disease outbreaks is alarmingly high. The ongoing conflict in Sudan is not just a regional crisis. It is a global tragedy unfolding in real time. Yet, despite the scale of the suffering, the international community's response has been muted at best. While there have been condemnations and calls for a ceasefire, concrete action to end the violence has been lacking. Organizations like the United Nations and Amnesty International are working tirelessly to provide humanitarian assistance and document human rights abuses. However, their efforts are hampered by a lack of funding, limited access to conflict zones, and the indifference of many world powers. The situation in Sudan demands a coordinated and robust international response. This includes diplomatic pressure on the warring parties to engage in meaningful peace talks, increased humanitarian aid to meet the needs of the displaced and vulnerable, and accountability for those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The conflict in Sudan is a stain on the conscience of humanity. It is a stark reminder of our collective failure to prevent and resolve conflicts, to protect the innocent, and to uphold the fundamental dignity of all human beings. The time for platitudes and empty promises is long gone. The world must act now to end the bloodshed in Sudan. Every day that passes without a resolution brings more suffering, more death, and more despair. We cannot afford to let indifference be the legacy of this crisis. The people of Sudan deserve peace, justice, and a future free from fear.